"Don't make this ugly, Mom," my son said, one hand still on the hospital bassinet. "By tomorrow she'll belong to someone else." I looked past him at the baby in the plastic crib, her tiny right hand curled inward, 2 fingers fused, a dark wine-colored birthmark spilling from her temple down her cheek like somebody had painted half her face in dusk. She yawned. He called her a problem. I called her mine. "Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, if your own child did this, would you forgive them? And follow along, because this story only gets wilder. My name is Elise Porter, and for 38 years I worked wardrobe in Chicago theater, which means I spent most of my life fixing things other people ripped in public and pretending I wasn't listening while actors ruined each other in whispers 6 feet away. I hemmed gowns in panic, replaced broken zippers between scenes, stitched blood packs into white shirts for matinee murders, and learned early that every polished performance is held together by invisible work and somebody's sore hands. That is probably why betrayal never surprises me in the moment. It only settles in later, when the room gets quiet enough for the shape of it to appear. The room was quiet that night except for the mechanical sigh of the postpartum floor and the soft squeak of rubber soles outside the door. Northwestern Memorial, 3rd floor, rain hitting the windows hard enough to blur the city lights into watercolor. My daughter-in-law Sloane had delivered 6 hours earlier. My granddaughter weighed 5 pounds, 12 ounces. She had a strong set of lungs, a face that stopped my heart, and a right hand the doctors called a congenital difference in their careful professional voices, along with a facial port wine stain that would likely need years of laser treatment if she wanted it reduced. She had been alive less than a day and already the language of correction had entered the room. My son Graham never looked at her the way a father should. He assessed her. That was his problem. Graham had spent most of his adult life turning every person, event, and inconvenience into a presentation slide in his head. He was 40 when this happened, handsome in an expensive, polished, downtown Chicago way, all clean coats and strategic stubble, and the kind of smile that made donors think he was listening even when he was only waiting for his turn to speak. He ran political messaging for city candidates, then consulting for developers, then his own public affairs firm. He understood headlines, perception, narrative control. He had married Sloane Mercer, who understood the internet in the same predatory way he understood headlines. She built a profitable lifestyle brand out of neutral sweaters, marble countertops, and the illusion that her life involved no sweat, no debt, no ugly crying, and no one under the age of 6 ever throwing blueberries at a wall. Together they were the kind of couple who photographed place cards at dinner. I knew what they were before that night. I just did not know how far they would go when the script handed them a child who did not match the campaign brochure version of their future. Sloane had cried when the pediatric specialist explained the hand difference. She cried harder when the dermatologist discussed the birthmark and the years of treatment choices. Graham had asked 3 questions in 10 minutes, every one of them about long-term functional outcomes, visibility, and social limitation. Not pain, not whether his daughter would be okay, not whether she would be happy. Just market research in a blazer. The baby's name was supposed to be Clara. They had monogrammed blankets at home. I had sewn a tiny cream christening gown out of leftover silk from a revival of the Glass Menagerie, because I am sentimental that way, and because theater teaches you to save the beautiful scraps. At 9:40 p.m., Graham called and told me to come back to the hospital because there had been a change of plans. That phrase alone should have warned me. I found him standing beside the bassinet, coat on already, as if the child in the crib were a hotel error he had come down to dispute. Sloane sat in bed with her face pale and blotched, her hair braided badly by a nurse, eyes swollen half shut from crying and morphine and whatever fresh horror had been pushed at her while I was gone getting coffee. There was a legal folder on the tray table beside a half-finished cup of broth. "What change of plans?" I asked. Graham turned toward me with that infuriatingly calm expression he wears when he thinks emotions are something happening to other people. "We're placing her privately," he said. "Tonight, Sloane's aunt connected us with an attorney and a family in Winnetka who've handled complex medical situations before. It's discreet, immediate, and best for everyone involved." I remember every detail of the next 5 seconds. The rain, the fluorescent buzz, the shape of the legal folder, the tiny white hospital hat slipping crooked over my granddaughter's dark hair, the exact click in my left knee when I took 1 step forward. "You're what?" Sloane covered her mouth and started crying again. Graham kept talking, because men like my son always mistake uninterrupted speech for moral authority. "Mom, listen to me. She is going to need surgeries, specialists, therapies, years of management, And yes, she can still have a life, obviously, but not the life we built toward. Not with everything we have going on. We are not equipped to do this well. Other people are. This family has resources, privacy, staff. We can make one painful decision now or sentence all three of us to a version of life built around damage control. Damage control. I looked at the baby. She stretched, made a tiny disgruntled face, and kicked once under the blanket. You mean your damage control, I said. Don't do that. She has been alive for less than a day and you're already talking about her like she's bad press. His jaw tightened. I'm talking like an adult. No, I said. You're talking like a coward with a media plan. He ignored that. The papers are almost done. Then tear them up. He laughed once, short and humorless, because he truly believed I had just said something naive. That isn't happening. I moved to the bassinet and put my hand flat on the rail. Then I'll take her. That finally changed his face. What? I said I'll take her. You think you're not equipped? Fine. I am. I raised you. I handled your father through chemo without a complaint. I have a paid-off house, 2 good hands and more patience than either of you deserve. I will take my granddaughter home tonight. Sloane made a choking little sound like hope had brushed past her and scared her half to death. Graham saw it too. He turned to her. Sloane. She looked away from him. That was the first crack. It's not that simple, he said. It is exactly that simple. No, it isn't. There are legal issues, optics, questions, people know we were expecting. There are brand partnerships, campaign clients, my board seat, her platform. If we suddenly disappear for 6 months and re-emerge with... He stopped himself, but not before I heard the rest of the sentence anyway. With that face, with that hand, with a child the internet would stare at and discuss and pity and use. I took 1 step toward him and pointed straight at his chest. Say one more cruel thing in front of her, just one, I dare you. He lowered his voice instead, which on Graham is worse. Don't make this ugly, Mom. By tomorrow, she'll belong to someone else. The baby stirred. Sloane turned her face to the wall. I said, very quietly, then by tomorrow, you'll be someone else to me. I picked up the legal folder from the tray, flipped it open, and saw enough names and signatures to understand that he had not spun out in panic that evening. He had already made calls, already activated people, already found a polished lane through which to remove his daughter from his life before she had been in it long enough to become inconveniently real. One of the pages named the receiving attorney, another referenced a temporary emergency consent. Sloane's signature was shaky. Graham's looked perfectly normal. I put the folder down because if I held it another second, I was going to hit my own son with it. I want 10 minutes alone with her, I said. No. That came from Graham too quickly. Sloane whispered. Graham. He did not look at her. No confusion, no dramatics. We are doing this cleanly. I turned to Sloane. Are you choosing this? Her lips trembled. For one impossible second, I thought she might tell the truth, might say she was terrified, drugged, bullied, cornered, that she had not expected the speed of this, that her aunt and husband and family lawyer had sealed the room around her until there seemed to be only one exit left. Instead, she said, I don't know how to do this. There are answers that are not answers. That was one of them. Then don't, I said. Graham stepped between me and the bed. And that was it. That was the moment something in me went still in the way it does right before thread slides through fabric and commits to a seam. No screaming, no throwing. Just the clean internal sound of a door closing. I bent over the bassinet. My granddaughter opened her eyes for half a second. Gray-blue, cloudy newborn eyes, unfocused and furious at existence, like all babies arriving in a bright world they did not ask for. I touched one finger to her good left hand. She caught it on reflex and held on. People say things in moments like that. Promises, vows, grand speeches. I didn't. I just looked at her and thought, I know who left first. I know who didn't. Then I put on my coat and walked out before I did something that would get me thrown off the floor. Chicago in March has a very specific cold. Not dramatic, not cinematic, petty, wet, mean around the edges. It gets into the cuffs of your coat and sits there. I walked to the parking garage in that cold, sat behind the wheel of my Subaru, and did not start the engine for 20 minutes. When my husband Daniel was alive, he used to say I had 2 settings in a crisis, useful and dangerous. That night I chose useful. By midnight, I had called a family law attorney I knew from theater board circles, an adoption ethics hotline, and an old friend named Maureen, who had run stage management for half the city before retiring into very respectable grandmotherhood and a secret second career, as the best unofficial information broker on the North Side. By 8 the next morning, I knew 3 things. First, what Graham and Sloane had done was legal enough to survive the weekend. Second, legal and moral have never been cousins, let alone siblings. Third, private placements done in panic through connected families often leave traces, but only if the people involved are sloppy, guilty, or both. Graham was rarely sloppy, so I started counting on guilt. The next 48 hours passed like a fever dream in good wool. I called the hospital. Nothing. I called the attorney listed on the folder. Polite refusal. I called Graham, straight to voicemail. I drove to their condo in Streeterville and rang until the doorman stopped meeting my eyes. I drove to Sloane's mother's house in Lake Forest and sat outside long enough to see a black SUV pull out with tinted windows and a car seat in the back. I followed for 11 miles before losing them on Sheridan Road because I am 67, not in a movie, and there are limits even righteous rage should recognize. By Sunday evening, the nursery at Graham's condo had been photographed, stripped, and quietly erased from Sloane's social feeds. A post appeared Monday morning. After a medically complicated birth, we're taking time privately as a family. Thank you for respecting our space. No baby photo, no name. 3 weeks later, another post. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. We appreciate your love while we heal. Thousands of comments, praying hands, white hearts, sympathy for a loss, no one named. I sat at my kitchen table in Lincoln Square and understood, with total clarity, that they were not simply abandoning a child, they were rewriting her out loud. So I began my own version. I have never believed in dramatic revenge. Real revenge is administration. It is paperwork. It is patience. It is learning exactly where a system thinks you will get tired and then making that the place you build a chair. For the first year, I learned everything I could about craniofacial birthmarks, pediatric hand differences, occupational therapy, adaptive design, and private adoption law in Illinois. I joined support groups under my own name and never once pretended my reason was noble. My son had surrendered my granddaughter because he thought her visible difference would ruin the life he had staged for himself, and I intended to find her before the story calcified into everybody's official memory. I attended fundraising walks in Grant Park, with mothers pushing strollers and children in sun hats and compression sleeves. I donated to a craniofacial family network in Evanston. I volunteered mending costumes for a nonprofit children's theater that specialized in accessible performance because, as it turned out, kids with hand differences are often excellent at costume design. They know adaptation before they know the word for it. At first I told myself I was following practical channels. Then the months passed and it became something larger and stranger. I was educating myself into the shape of the grandmother she should have had from the beginning. In some humiliating way, it felt like apprenticeship. Daniel died 4 years before this happened, pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral, which is a timeline I still resent on principle. He had been a public school history teacher with the hands of a pianist and the patience of a saint who swore under his breath in traffic. He loved Graham without illusions, which is the best kind of parental love and the hardest to maintain once your child becomes impressive in rooms full of people who do not know his worst age. I talked to Daniel constantly after he died, mostly in the sewing room at the back of my house where I kept bolts of fabric, 3 dress forms, and a wall of labeled drawers that could out-organize most pharmacies. I talked to him again that first spring. "Well," I said aloud while rethreading my serger at 2 a.m, "your son has finally discovered how to disappoint me on a scale large enough to require fresh vocabulary." The machine hummed. The rain tapped the window. I kept working. Year 2 brought nothing except bills, directories, dead ends, and a slow hardening of my opinion of everyone involved. Year 3 brought a small crack. It arrived in the form of a padded envelope forwarded twice, first from my old post office box in the theater district, then from the church office where I still occasionally handled costume storage for Christmas pageants. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was not of the baby. It was of me. Or rather, of me and Daniel on Navy Pier 10 years earlier, laughing over paper cups of coffee on a windy October afternoon. I knew the photo because Graham had taken it. You could tell by the angle. He always thought candids made him look more emotionally available than he was. Tucked behind it was a note in tiny neat handwriting on unlined cream paper. "If she ever asks, tell her your mother's mother would have come for her. Her name is Elise Porter. She wears a silver thimble on a chain when she's nervous. She will not have forgotten. No signature." I sat down so fast I missed the chair. The silver thimble was hanging around my neck. Only a handful of people knew about it. Daniel, Graham, Sloane. I read the note 6 times. Then I put it in a plastic sleeve, locked it in the drawer with the house deed, and spent the next 2 months trying to decide whether I hated Sloane more for sending it or less. Because make no mistake, that note did not absolve her. It condemned her in a softer handwriting. She had known what Graham was doing. She had participated. She had signed. She had chosen silence in the bright moment and courage only later, cheaply, by mail, when the cost to herself had dropped. A breadcrumb tossed backward into the dark is still not the same as turning around. But it was a breadcrumb. And breadcrumbs are how you keep walking when the forest gets boring. So I kept walking. Years 4 and 5 were brutal. Graham and I maintained what civilized people call limited contact and what theater people call not speaking backstage. Thanksgiving if other relatives were present. Christmas at his place once, at mine never. His life expanded the way glossy lives do. Larger condo, better clients, magazine mentions, Sloane relaunching her brand around resilience and private healing. Then a son born 2 years after the first child disappeared. Followed by a daughter 18 months later. Healthy, photogenic, beige nursery, matching cashmere hats and family photos. Every time I saw those children, every time I watched Graham lift a stroller or cut grapes in half or complain about preschool waitlists with the casual authority of a father, allowed to keep the kids who reflected well on him, something ugly moved under my ribs. I never let it show. Because rage is expensive, and I was saving for something. Theo, my younger brother Theodore, who everyone called Teddy except his creditors, said once that I was frightening when quiet. That's because when I'm quiet, I told him, I'm usually tailoring. He laughed so hard he almost inhaled a peanut. Teddy lived in Oak Park in a converted 2-flat full of jazz records, plant cuttings, and bad romantic decisions. He repaired antique radios for money and charm alone, which meant never enough of the first and too much of the second. He was the only person I told everything to from the start. You know what burns me? He said one night over Chinese takeout. It isn't even that Graham is shallow, he's always been shallow. What burns me is the speed. He didn't even let the child exist long enough to surprise him. That stayed with me. Because that was it exactly. Babies are all possibility. He looked at his own daughter and chose certainty instead. Teddy had heart trouble by then, though he pretended not to. He died in year 5 after a minor surgery that became not minor by dawn. Just like that. A phone call at 4:17 a.m., and then a corridor and then paperwork. He had no children, no savings worth fighting over, and exactly one instruction in his will beyond practical matters. My vintage radio collection goes to any kid who knows how to listen past static. I laughed when I read it and cried hard enough to scare the funeral director. The losses did not make me softer. They made me narrower and cleaner. Grief did what it often does when you survive it long enough. It burned away the social fat. I stopped caring about appearances. Stopped pretending I would reconcile simply because time had passed. Stopped thinking of Graham's eventual remorse as something I needed to facilitate. Meanwhile, the search changed shape. I had never been especially good with computers beyond what costume departments require, which is more than people think and less than teenagers consider human. So I took a course at Harold Washington Library on digital records, public archives, and nonprofit search tools. I learned how to cross-reference gala donor lists, family foundation boards, volunteer rosters, and youth program newsletters. Not because I believed my granddaughter would appear in a database under a blinking arrow, but because wealthy families who adopt through private channels often give back to the ecosystem that flatters them. I built spreadsheets, I made note cards, I tracked surnames connected to the attorney from that first folder. I followed philanthropy the way other women my age follow murder podcasts. And I noticed one surname recurring in surprising places. Bellamy. Harper Bellamy chaired a pediatric facial differences fundraiser in Winnetka. Bellamy Family Foundation donated to an adaptive arts lab on the North Shore. Bellamy Interiors sponsored a junior makers showcase in Evanston. Bellamy, Bellamy, Bellamy. The receiving attorney from the hospital folder, paid once, publicly, by a Bellamy family trust for unrelated counsel the same year. Coincidence exists, so does money traveling in familiar circles. I needed an entry point. I got one in year 8 from a 15-year-old boy named Nico Alvarez who hated authority, loved rivet guns, and could sketch a period corset from memory after seeing it once. Nico came into my life because the nonprofit theater where I volunteered launched a Saturday technical costume lab for teenagers who preferred backstage to center stage. Most of them liked tools, thrift stores, weird fabrics, and not being forced to make eye contact while they talked, which meant, unsurprisingly, I liked them too. Nico was all elbows, wit, and damage he pretended was style. His mother worked nights as a respiratory therapist at Swedish Hospital. His father existed mostly in money order form from Indiana. He started hanging around after workshop hours because I fed people and because I treated him like a person, not a cautionary tale in a hoodie. He also knew everyone. By 16, he had stitched costumes, repaired 3 prom dresses for classmates, and become the unofficial tech goblin for half a dozen youth arts programs across the city and North Shore. He complained about suburban kids the way only a city kid can, with precision and anthropological interest. One rainy Saturday in October, he was showing me photos from a collaborative showcase in Evanston fashion, engineering, adaptive tools, youth makers, the kind of event people with trust funds describe as innovative community synergy. He was making fun of the lighting. I was pretending not to be impressed by a laser-cut metal bodice one child had built out of recycled soda cans. Then the next photo came up. Foreground, a row of display tables. Background, a girl in a black denim jacket leaning over a 3D printer, laughing at something off frame. I stopped breathing for a second. She had Daniel's eyebrows. Not like him, his. The same level line, the same skeptical arch at the outer edge when amused. Her hair was dark and cut blunt at the jaw. The port wine stain was still there, visible and unapologetic, sweeping across her right cheek and temple-like color, thrown by a generous hand. Her right hand, smaller than the left, rested on the printer edge with 2 custom silver rings linking finger supports I had never seen before. Her whole body gave off force. Not confidence exactly. Voltage. "Who is that?" I asked. Nico glanced down. "Which one?" "The girl by the printer." "Oh, that's Ren Bellamy." My heart hit my ribs so hard it felt stupid. "Bellamy." "Yeah, rich suburb Bellamy. But she's cool, which is annoying on principle. She built this adaptive sewing clamp thing for people who only have full grip on one side. See?" He swiped. Another photo. A sleek table-mounted device with adjustable pressure arms, soft-lined braces, and a foot pedal control. I sat very still. Nico kept talking. Her mom's on some board. Or her grandma. One of those women with cashmere and opinions. Anyway, Ren comes to the Maker's Lab twice a month and absolutely destroys everyone at prototypes. She acts like she doesn't care, then wins without smiling. "Do you know her?" "Kinda, not close. She hangs with the design crowd more than theater kids. Why?" "No reason," I said, which would have worked better if my voice had not gone thin as tracing paper. Nico looked at me, looked at the photo, then back at me. "Elise." I put down the scissors in my hand. He lowered his phone. "Is this one of those moments where I need to stop being a goblin and become a serious person?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Okay, do you want to tell me why your face just changed?" I told him enough. Not everything. Not at first. Teenagers are not therapists and should not be made into repositories for adult grief just because they're kind enough to listen. But I told him my son had surrendered a newborn daughter years ago, that I had spent nearly a decade searching, that a private adoption and a connected family were involved, and that the girl in his photo looked like the ghost of half my relatives. Nico leaned against the cutting table and went quiet in a way I had only seen twice before, both times when he was deciding whether to trust his own softness. "You think she's yours," he said. "My granddaughter," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay, that doesn't mean she is." "No, but it means we don't do anything stupid." It surprised a laugh out of me. That was exactly what I was about to say. Good, because I have many stupid ideas and I'm suppressing all of them. He did better than that. He helped me do this correctly. Over the next month he told me what he knew. Ren was 16. She attended a private school in Wilmette on scholarship full ride, merit-based, apparently terrifying at math and industrial design. She spent Saturdays at an adaptive maker's lab in Evanston called Forge Forward, where teens design tools, clothing modifications, and assistive devices. She wore mostly black, hated being patronized, and once made a suburban boy cry in front of a soldering station for calling her inspirational in the wrong tone. "Smart girl," I said. "The smartest," Nico replied. The lab hosted a holiday showcase in December. Open public event. Donors, families, students, volunteers. I bought a ticket the day registration opened. The morning of the showcase, I changed clothes 4 times. This is not because I am vain, it is because first meetings matter and theater has ruined me for under-costumed entrances. I ended up in dark trousers, a charcoal coat, lipstick I had nearly convinced myself I was too old for, and the silver thimble around my neck under my blouse where it could not tempt memory into melodrama. Forge Forward occupied a converted brick warehouse near the tracks, all big windows and steel beams and tables covered in prototypes. It smelled like hot plastic, coffee, and ambition. Wealthy parents clustered near the donor wall. Teenagers rolled their eyes professionally. Somewhere a glue gun crackled. I saw Ren before she saw me. She stood beside a display labeled "Stabilizing Clamp for One-Handed Fabric Control." The final device was elegant in a way that told me immediately she was not simply technically gifted. She had taste, clean lines, thoughtful pressure points. A clamp arm padded in removable washable covers, multiple mount angles, a treadle-style foot control adapted from an old sewing machine design. I knew that treadle. My first singer at 19 had used a similar motion. For one wild second I thought, of course this child found thread anyway. She was explaining the device to an older woman using both hands in quick, precise gestures, then demonstrating how a fabric panel could be guided one-handed through a machine if the clamp held the tension at the correct angle. Her right hand was smaller, yes, but she used it with total authority, aided by a custom support ring system that turned what others might call limitation into engineering data. Her birthmark was vivid under the overhead light. She had made no attempt to cover it. I loved her instantly for that, not because covering it would have been weakness, but because refusing the labor of comfort for strangers at 16 is a form of genius. Nico found me near the entrance. You look like you're about to either faint or kill someone. Unhelpful. Fair. He glanced toward Ren. Do you want an introduction? Not yet. Everything in me wanted to run across that room and say your name was Clara for 6 hours. Your grandfather Daniel would have adored you. Your father was a polished coward, and I am sorry it took me this long. Everything in me also knew that would be a selfish catastrophe. No, I said. I want to watch. So I watched. Ren talked with her hands and whole face, like someone who did not apologize for taking up space. She challenged dumb questions, smirked at praise she didn't trust, lit up when another teen showed her a joint design. She had Daniel's eyebrows, yes, but she also had a trait I had seen in exactly one other person. Graham, at 17, before ambition calcified him, used to forget himself around maps, transit maps, city plans, old neighborhood plats, zoning charts, anything system-based and full of hidden intention. When he was genuinely interested, his whole body leaned toward the thing. Ren leaned like that over mechanisms. There is no grief quite like seeing the best of someone's bloodline bloom in a child they did not deserve. Near the end of the showcase, Nico brought her over under the pretense of introducing industry volunteers to student designers. Ren, this is Elise Porter. She does costume construction and adaptive garment work. Elise, this is Ren Bellamy, tyrant of the prototyping table. Ren snorted. That's defamatory. So sue me, Nico said, already backing away because he was a professional menace and knew exactly what he was doing. Ren turned back to me. Up close, the resemblance hit harder. Daniel in the brow, my mother's chin. A little of Graham at the mouth, which irritated me on principle. I smiled. Your clamp is excellent. She studied me for a beat, then nodded once. Thanks. You stole from a treadle machine. That got me a real look. Borrowed, improved. Fair enough. She glanced at my hands. You sew? I've built costumes for more bad productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream than any decent person should survive. That made her laugh. Good laugh. Sharp, brief, earned. I asked 3 technical questions. She answered all of them without dumbing anything down. By the second answer I knew 2 things. First, she was absolutely mine. Second, she was not a person anyone had the right to enter dramatically. So I left after 10 minutes, bought one of the lab's overpriced tote bags like a woman capable of casual support, and cried in my car on Maple Avenue with both hands on the steering wheel and mascara I had specifically purchased because it promised not to do that. Finding her did not end the search. It changed its terms. Now I needed the truth without breaking the life she actually had. That part took another year. I began volunteering at Forge Forward twice a month under my real name and very modest pretenses, altering aprons, teaching material handling, helping students prototype adaptive fastenings for theatrical garments, which turned out to be more useful than anybody expected. I did not hover around Ren. I did not ask personal questions. I did not behave like a secret relative in a Hallmark fever dream. I showed up. I did good work. I let her decide whether I was interesting. She decided I was interesting in February when she discovered I knew how to draft a sleeve pattern that compensated for asymmetrical arm movement without looking medical. Where did you learn that? She asked. 30 years of actors refusing to admit pain until 5 minutes before curtain, I said. That earned another laugh. After that, we started talking. First about construction, then about design, then about the politics of visibility, then about stupid people and how to survive them without getting expelled or arrested. She told me she hated being called brave by adults who had never once had to decide whether to let a stranger stare or educate them for free. She wanted to study industrial design or wearable engineering or maybe both. She had no patience for pity and even less for people who confused prettiness with worth. Good, I said. Pity is a tax on the person already carrying the load. She looked at me strangely. That's a good line. It's an old woman perk. We get a few before death. Morbid, she said. Efficient. By spring she had started texting me pictures of design failures. By summer she came to my house in Lincoln Square twice to look through my old sewing machine manuals because she believed antique mechanics had better instincts than modern interfaces. By fall she had met my friend Maureen, stolen Teddy's radio screwdriver set off a shelf and used it to repair a jammed feed mechanism, and insulted my tea selection with the authority of somebody who had never paid a utility bill. I liked her more every week. That was the danger. Because love makes timing complicated. Once you know a person as themselves, not just as the missing outline in your grief, you understand how much a revelation can cost them. I no longer wanted merely to find my granddaughter. I wanted not to injure Wren Bellamy in the act of becoming whoever she really was. So I requested a meeting with her adoptive mother. Harper Bellamy suggested the Four Seasons. I countered with a quieter cafe in Wilmette where rich women and tired teachers coexist without making eye contact. She arrived in camel wool and pearls, exactly the kind of woman I had expected from the donor boards. Composed, beautiful in a practiced way, 60 maybe, with the posture of someone raised to believe collapse is what happens privately to other families. She also had grief in the face. I spotted it before she sat down. That changed things. Mrs. Bellamy, I said. Miss Porter. We ordered coffee. Neither of us drank it for the first 2 minutes. Then Harper placed a flat archival box on the table between us. I wondered when this day might come, she said. My hands went cold. She opened the box. Inside lay the note I had received years earlier, sleeved carefully. Under it, a hospital bracelet with baby girl M. Porter typed in tiny faded print. Below that, a newborn photo. My granddaughter in profile, one fist against her cheek, the birthmark vivid even in the hospital lighting. I had to put one hand under the table because it was shaking. Harper's voice remained calm, but it was the kind of calm people build after long practice, not the easy kind. My daughter Lillian adopted Wren when Wren was 3 days old, she said. Lillian could not carry a pregnancy. She and her husband, Andrew, had been trying for years and had already endured one failed private placement that broke her heart. This one came through a family attorney we trusted. We were told the birth parents wanted absolute privacy and no future contact. We were told the infant had a hand difference and visible vascular birthmark. We were not told that the placement had been accelerated because the father found her inconvenient to his public image. I looked up sharply. Harper gave me a long measuring look. I learned that later. How? She hesitated. Because Sloan Mercer wrote to Lillian 6 months after the adoption. Of course she did. Harper slid another envelope from the box. Lillian kept everything. Inside was a 2-page letter in Sloan's handwriting, fuller and less controlled than the note I'd received. She apologized without using the word cowardice, which is how cowards usually do it. She wrote that the decision had happened too fast, that Graham had insisted they could not let the baby become public knowledge, that she had panicked, that she had agreed because she was recovering and surrounded by voices louder than her own. She wrote that Wren's maternal grandmother Me would have fought for the child if she had been allowed. She enclosed my photo and enough identifying details that, if Wren ever chose to search, she could start with me. I hated her for writing it, Harper said quietly. Then I hated her for waiting so long. I exhaled a laugh that held no amusement. Yes. Harper folded her hands. Lillian died when Wren was 9. Everything in me stopped. She died? Car accident on the Edens. A truck lost traction in sleet. Andrew was driving. He survived. She didn't. I sat back hard against the chair. There are moments when grief gets introduced to new grief, and both have to stand there blinking. That was one. Wren was in the car? In the back seat, bruised, no serious injuries. Harper's expression shifted, finally, from composed to something rawer. After Lillian died, Andrew lasted about 18 months before deciding he did not want to be the sole parent of a child who reminded him of what he'd lost and did not fit the life he wanted to rebuild. He signed over guardianship. She came to live with me. I stared at her. So that was the shape of it. Rejected once for visibility, then nearly discarded again because grief made a man selfish. Did he leave? He moved to Seattle, remarried, sends checks on time, and calls often enough to retain the title without the work. Harper's mouth tightened by maybe 0.5 millimeter. Ren no longer expects anything from him, which, in my experience, is worse. I looked down at the box, the hospital bracelet, the photo, the letter. Evidence. Does she know? I asked. Harper took a slow breath. She knows she was adopted at birth. She knows there was panic and concealment. She knows her birth mother later left information about you. She does not know all the details of why she was placed. I refused to tell her until I met you myself. Why? Because information is not the same as character. That was a hard sentence. Fair, infuriating, true. And now? I asked. Harper held my gaze. Now I believe you are exactly what Sloan Mercer said you were. I nearly laughed at the bitterness of it. She was right too late. Yes, Harper said, but not wrong. We sat in silence for a while after that. The cafe steamed milk and clinked silverware around us like ordinary life had not just split open in booth 7. Finally Harper said, Ren has been choosing you for months already. I saw it before she did. She talks about your design corrections as if they're gospel and insults my lampshades with your exact phrasing now, which I do not appreciate. I covered my face with one hand and laughed despite myself. She also asked last week, Harper went on, whether the silver thimble meant anything. The room tilted slightly. What did you say? I said yes. That was all. 3 days later, Ren came to my house on a Sunday afternoon. No workshop, no pretense, no roll of tracing paper under her arm. Just her, black coat, hair damp from mist, hands shoved into her pockets in a way that told me she was already braced for impact. I let her in. Neither of us sat right away. My kitchen suddenly felt too small, then too bright, then unbearably ordinary with its fruit bowl and mail pile and stupid cheerful dish towel. I almost offered tea, which would have been insane. Ren looked at the silver thimble resting against my blouse. My mother told me about that, she said. It was the first time I had heard her say mother and not mean Harper. My throat tightened. Sloan told you? Not directly. Her voice stayed level. Harper showed me the letter last night, then the photo, then some other things. She took one breath, then another. Are you my grandmother? There is no elegant way to answer the question you have spent 9 years begging the universe to let someone ask. Yes, I said. Ren nodded once, like she had expected that and was now annoyed to find expectation no easier than shock. And Graham Porter is my father. Yes. She looked away, jaw tight. He gave me away because of my face and my hand. There it was, clean, flat, more brutal for being accurate. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then chose truth over cushioning because she had earned at least that much. Yes. She moved to the window and stood with her back half turned to me. Rain made soft tracks down the glass. When did you know it was me? At the showcase in Evanston. And you didn't tell me. No. Why? Because by then I knew enough to understand that dropping that into your lap in a warehouse full of donor cheese cubes would have been selfish. A sound escaped her, not quite a laugh. Not anger either. Good call, she said. I waited. After a long minute, she turned around. Her eyes were bright but dry. Daniel's eyebrows, my mother's chin, Graham's mouth, all of it there, and none of it more important than the person standing in front of me having to decide in real time what this information would mean. Did you try to find me? She asked. 9 years. That landed. How? So I told her. Not every detail. Not the ugliest names I had called her father alone at midnight. Not the stalking outside Lake Forest gates. Not the fantasies involving a donor gala and a microphone. But enough. The support groups. The databases. The note. The years. The workshops. Nico's photo. Harper. The waiting. By the time I finished, the kitchen had gone dark enough for the under-cabinet lights to click on automatically. Ren stood very still through all of it, then she said, Did my birth mother ever want me? That question nearly took me out at the knees. Yes, I said, because wanting and protecting are not always twins, but they are still related. I think she wanted you and failed you, both are true. Ren absorbed that with the expression of someone mentally filing a blade. Did she fight? No. Why not? She was afraid of the wrong man in the wrong room at the wrong time. And then? And then she chose the coward's version of conscience. She left a trail instead of opening a door. Ren looked down at her right hand. That sounds like her. It startled me. You know her? No, but I know people who care more after than during. There was 16 in that sentence, and 80. I said carefully, You do not owe any of them generosity. She met my eyes. Do I owe you any? Fair enough. No, I said. You don't owe me anything either. We stood there with that for a moment. Then, to my everlasting shock, she said, Okay, I'm hungry. Do you have food or just old lady olives and one yogurt from 2019? I stared at her. One corner of her mouth moved. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. That was how it began. Not with a swelling soundtrack, not with an embrace. With grilled cheese, tomato soup, and Ren discovering the secret cookie tin above my fridge like she had always had a map. Over the next year, we built something. Neither of us rushed into naming in front of other people. She came by after school. We worked on garments and hardware hybrids for a youth design competition. I taught her how to flatline silk and why cheap thread is an insult to civilization. She taught me CAD shortcuts and why teenagers think email is where conversation goes to die. We fought once about whether an object should reveal its adaptation or conceal it. She argued for visible intelligence. I argued for user choice. She won on theory. I won on practice. We both left smug. She met Daniel through stories, Teddy through records, Maureen through brutally honest compliments, and Nico through immediate mutual disrespect that turned into friendship so quickly it was practically family. Harper watched all of it with the exhausted caution of a woman who had already once buried a daughter and was not eager to watch another form of losing happen in slow motion. She did not obstruct. She did not sentimentalize. She did, however, invite me to Thanksgiving after Ren told her, If you make it weird, I'll know. Harper, I learned, made astonishing mashed potatoes and terrible small talk with hedge fund people. We got along beautifully. Graham knew none of this. That was not an accident. For the first months after Ren learned the truth, she wanted nothing to do with him, not curiosity, not rage, just a flat, almost clinical refusal. I'm not interested in becoming meaningful to him now that I'm old enough to have accomplishments, she said one afternoon while tightening a bracket on a prototype shoulder harness. That sentence was so precise I wanted it engraved on his front door. Still, time moves, people grow, complications enter. In May, Ren won a statewide innovation prize for a modular one-handed fabric stabilization system designed for classrooms and home sewing users. The local news covered it. Then a design blog. Then a bigger feature in a Sunday magazine section about young inventors changing access in the arts. There was a photograph. Half profile, birthmark visible, last name Bellamy, first name Ren. Graham called me 43 minutes after the article went live. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mom. His voice already sounded wrong. Yes? Pause. I need to ask you something. No, you need to tell me what finally made you notice. Silence. Then, Is that girl your daughter? I said. Yes. He exhaled like somebody had punched him very politely. How long have you known? A while. You found her and said nothing? I almost admired the speed with which he made himself the injured party. Yes, I said. Turns out secrets bother people differently depending on how much they benefit from them. He ignored that. Does Sloane know? She does now. Another pause. She reached out to me. Of course she had. The article would have hit Sloane like a train built from memory and guilt. Visible face. Bellamy name. Design talent. The age. The impossible math suddenly becoming elementary. What did you say? I asked. Nothing yet. Excellent. Keep that streak alive. Mom. His voice sharpened. I have a right to know what kind of contact you've had with my biological child. I actually laughed. Biological child. Listen to you. She has a name, Graham, a life, preferences, a grandmother, as it happens. Rights don't mature in storage just because your conscience finally woke up with a branding concern. That's unfair. No, unfair was a newborn in a bassinet while you discussed optics. He inhaled, exhaled, shifted tactics, because he always does. I was panicking. We were young. It was complicated. You were 40. Silence. She doesn't want contact, I said. That is where things stand. If that changes, it will be because she changed it, not because you rediscovered her after an article made her legible. He started to say something legal. I cut him off. And before you embarrass yourself further, know this. Harper Bellamy has counsel. So do I. If you approach Ren without invitation, you will meet them both. I hung up before he could recover. Sloane called the next day. I answered because cowardice with tears still counts as cowardice, but sometimes it is more informative. She was crying before hello. I saw the article, she said. Yes. I knew immediately. Yes. Elise, please just let me know if she's okay. I stood at my kitchen sink looking out at my herb boxes and felt an exhaustion older than anger. She built a device that will make it easier for children with one fully dominant hand to sew independently, I said. She won a statewide prize. She has a devastating opinion on bad hardware and better hair than you ever did. She is more okay than any of you deserve. Sloane sobbed once into the phone. I was so afraid. You should have been. I know. No, I said, and my voice came out flatter than I intended. You don't. If you knew, you wouldn't keep talking about yourself in this sentence. There was a long silence after that. Then, quietly, can I write to her? I thought of the first note, the second, the years between them, the price other people had paid for her incremental conscience. You can write, I said. Whether she reads it is none of your business. Wren agreed to receive the letter through Harper. She read it at my dining table with a pencil in her hair and a half-finished mock-up spread beside her, which felt appropriate somehow. She read the whole thing once, then again more slowly, then folded it into thirds so crisp it might have been machine-pressed. Well? I asked. Wren shrugged. That's all? She says I was never the problem. And? I know. She slid the letter back across the table. No reply? She thought for a second. Then she pulled a sticky note from my pad and wrote 9 words. I was never the problem. You knew that first. She handed it to me. Send that. I looked at her. She went back to her mock-up. There are people twice her age who will never learn to put a blade down that cleanly. By then I had already called my attorney. His name was Russell Bain, and unlike the theatrical sharks who advertise on buses, Russell looked exactly like a man who knew where every comma in your will belonged, and would not allow sentiment to place one incorrectly. He worked in a limestone building off LaSalle and wore practical ties. I assume this meeting isn't about retirement planning, he said after I finished telling him what had changed. No, I said, it's about architecture. He blinked. My estate, I clarified. What stands, what falls, what gets redirected. We spent 2 hours revising documents. My house in Lincoln Square, the sewing room, the machines, the archive of patterns and costume books, the brokerage account Daniel and I built slowly over 30 years, the insurance money I never spent, because grief shrank my appetite for nonsense, the Bell and Howell projector Teddy left me, the radio collection, the silver jewelry from my mother, the vintage machines, the royalties from 2 ludicrously successful costume manuals I co-authored in the late 90s. Everything went into a trust. Half to Wren Bellamy, outright at 25 with educational access sooner. Half to a fund supporting adaptive design apprenticeships for teenagers in Chicago arts programs, named for Daniel Porter and Theodore Porter, because legacy should be useful or it is just furniture. Graham received $1. Russell looked up over his glasses. A statement. A receipt, I said. He nodded as if that made better sense. Then I did one more thing. I transferred the rights to my instructional pattern library and the remaining equipment from my old freelance business into a new LLC, whose managing future interest would pass to Wren if she wanted it. Not because I expected her to become me, God forbid. The girl had broader horizons, but because I knew something Graham did not. Tools are power when given early. Revenge, I told you, is administration. I had no intention of springing any of this on Graham in a screaming match. He would only use chaos to cast himself as a target. No. If I was going to let him understand what he had done, it would be controlled, documented, and timed, so there would be no dramatic oxygen left in the room for him to set himself on fire and call it warmth. The chance came in September. Graham was preparing to launch a citywide initiative with 3 high-profile clients around inclusive urban development, the kind of corporate civic vanity project that comes with keynote speeches, tasteful banners, and donor dinners where everybody says community as if they invented sidewalks. Sloane, of course, had pivoted her brand again, now toward designing a life that honors every story, which would have been funny if it weren't disgusting. The launch dinner took place at a gleaming event space in the West Loop, all exposed brick and expensive sincerity. Graham called a week beforehand asking whether I would attend. I'd love to support family, he said. The shamelessness of that almost impressed me. I said yes. So did Wren. That was her idea, not mine. When I told her about the event, I expected disgust and refusal. Instead, she leaned back in my kitchen chair, folded one leg under herself, and asked, "Will there be press?" "Yes." "Will he be pretending to care about access?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then I want to go." Harper nearly choked on tea when I told her. "Are you sure?" she asked Wren. "No," Wren said. "But I'm interested." That, in Wren's language, meant the decision was made. We planned carefully. No ambush speech, no public scene, no melodrama that would let Graham perform harm. Wren would attend as a recognized youth design honoree true, since the initiative had invited student innovators to a side exhibit, and Graham would not know until he saw the name on the program 2 hours before doors. That detail came courtesy of a board member Maureen knew from her opera years, because never underestimate retired theater women with time. The night of the event, Chicago was all glass and amber. The river looked expensive. I wore black silk and the silver thimble over the dress, visible for the first time in years. Wren wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit with asymmetrical fastenings she had designed herself, one sleeve adjusted subtly for her right arm, her birthmark bare, hair slicked back, earrings like little silver bolts. She looked like the future arriving 15 minutes early out of irritation. When we stepped into the lobby, heads turned the way they do when style and self-possession enter together. Graham saw us from across the room. I will cherish that face until I die. Not because it was cartoonish, because it wasn't. It was worse. All his control stayed visible. He did not gasp. He did not stagger. He simply went pale by degrees, as if somebody were quietly draining color from his expensive confidence while he stood there trapped inside it. Sloane, beside him, put one hand over her mouth. Wren glanced at them once, then at the donor signage, then back at me. He looks exactly like a man who just discovered consequences have legs. I had to look away to keep from laughing into the registration flowers. The program moved forward whether or not anyone's sins were seated at table 12. Student innovators were introduced during the second course. Wren's name was called. She crossed the small stage under a warm spotlight, accepted a plaque from a woman who had no idea she was helping the universe with timing, and gave 38 seconds of remarks. That is not much time. It was enough. My work focuses on tools that make participation easier without asking people to become smaller first, she said. Good design should not treat difference like a flaw that needs hiding before someone is allowed in the room. Thank you to the people who taught me that function and dignity belong together. She did not look at Graham while she said it. She did not need to. Applause followed, warm and ordinary and devastating. To everyone else, it was a smart young designer making a point. To Graham, it was a blade slid between past and present with no blood visible on the tablecloth. After dessert, he cornered me in a side corridor near the coat check. He looked immaculate. He sounded wrecked. You brought her here. She brought herself. This is cruel. I stared at him. No, cruel was a legal folder in a hospital room. He ran one hand over his mouth. Does she know everything? Enough. Mom, please. There it was. The voice men discover when their authority fails and they have to shop secondhand in the language of sons. What do you want from me? I asked. To talk to her. Why? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again, because she's my daughter. And where was that sentence when it cost something? His eyes flashed. You think I don't know I made the wrong decision? I stepped closer. No, I think you know now that it was the losing one. That hit. Good. Listen carefully, I said. She owes you nothing, not closure, not a conversation, not a chance to watch you cry your way into feeling redeemed. If she decides to speak to you someday, it will be because it serves her, not because you finally located your soul under a donor napkin. His face hardened then, because shame without control usually ferments into anger. You cut me out of your life for one decision. I nearly smiled. One? Interesting count. Mom. One decision in a hospital. One decision every day after that to keep the lie polished. One decision to raise 2 more children under a roof built partly on erasure. One decision every holiday to let me sit across from you knowing what you had done and still expecting roast potatoes. He looked away. And one more thing, I said. Russell Bain has the revised trust documents. In case your recent rediscovery of biology has a financial component, save yourself the trouble. The future is already allocated. His eyes snapped back to mine. You changed your will. Yes. To her? To people who understand the difference between value and appearance. He stared at me with something close to disbelief, as if some deep childish part of him had honestly believed maternal property remained morally his regardless of conduct. You would punish your own son for this. I said, very quietly, no, Graham, I am simply declining to reward him. Behind him, at the end of the corridor, Wren stood near a display easel speaking with Harper and Nico. She looked over once. Not pleading, not curious, just aware. Graham followed my gaze. For a second I thought he might walk toward her anyway. Then he saw whatever was in her face, perhaps nothing more than complete unwillingness, and stopped. He left the corridor without another word. Sloane approached later, after most guests had shifted toward coffee service and networking. She looked thinner than she used to, which can be grief or vanity or age or all three. Her eyes kept finding Ren and flinching away again. "Elise," she said, could you please tell her?" "No." She swallowed. "I loved her." "Yes," I said. "And then?" That undid her more effectively than shouting would have. She shook her head, tears already there. "I was weak." "Correct. I was terrified of him, of all of it." "Also correct. And I thought if I left a way back someday." "A way back for whom?" She stopped. I softened then, not from forgiveness but accuracy. "Listen to me. The tragedy of your life may be that you were not the worst person in the room, just the person who knew better and still stayed seated." She closed her eyes. I left her there. Ren chose not to speak to either of them that night. She did, however, take the plaque home and set it on the work table in my sewing room beside Teddy's screwdriver set, which made me suspiciously emotional for a woman who likes to think she runs on starch and spite. Life after that did not become neat. People who tell you endings feel clean are selling something. Graham called twice in the following months. I let the first go to voicemail. The second I answered because I was in traffic and bored. "I've started therapy," he said, as if announcing a hostage negotiation. "That sounds expensive. Can you ever talk to me like I'm your son again?" I considered that. "I am talking to you like my son," I said. "You just preferred the version where that had no moral weight." He had no answer. Ren met her half-brother and half-sister eventually, but not through Graham, through Harper's careful back-channeling and my refusal to let children pay for adult rot more than necessary. They were younger, confused, and innocent in the boring, ordinary way children often are. Ren handled them with more grace than anyone had a right to expect. She did not meet Graham that day either. "Maybe later," she told me afterward while stripping tape from a project box. "Maybe never. I haven't decided if he wants me or the chance to see himself as somebody who tried." I said, "That is an excellent question." She gave me a sideways look. "You already know the answer." "Probably." "Don't tell me." I wouldn't. By the following spring, Ren had been accepted to RISD, Carnegie Mellon, and Northwestern. She chose Northwestern because Harper pretended not to care and then cried over a salad. Ren also chose it because Chicago had become, in her words, the city where my tools live, which I understood immediately. The summer before college, we converted my back sewing room into a hybrid studio, one side machines and dress forms. The other side printers, clamps, modular rigs, and a workbench built to Ren's height. I paid for the bench. She pretended not to notice. I noticed that pretense and let her keep it. On the first day of classes, she left the house in black trousers and a white shirt she had altered herself, carrying a portfolio tube, coffee, and the kind of expression people wear when they are trying not to admit they are thrilled. At the door she turned back. "Elise." "Yes?" She looked at the silver thimble, then at me. "I'm glad you kept looking. There are sentences you save whole lives for." I touched her cheek, the unmarked side, because I am not stupid and because every person has their own map for what is touch and what is taking. "So am I said. She nodded once and left. The house stayed full after that. Good houses do when they've finally admitted who belongs in them. Harper came for dinner often enough to critique my curtains and earn seconds anyway. Nico got into Columbia College and still raided my pantry like a raccoon with taste. Maureen claimed she had become too old for drama, then stayed on the phone 40 minutes every time one of Graham's public projects underperformed. Russell sent polite quarterly updates. Life, insultingly, continued. Graham never stopped wanting a version of absolution he did not have to kneel for. Sometimes it came out as voicemails, sometimes flowers on my porch with no note, because guilt remains allergic to specificity. Once it came as a donation to Forge Forward under his firm's name, which Ren noticed on the annual report and called an aggressive act of emotional laundering. She was correct. We laughed. Then she doubled the next year's gift privately from her own prize money, and added a note restricting use to youth tool stipends in memory of Daniel and Theodore Porter. Function and dignity together. She had been listening. The only direct message she ever sent Graham herself arrived 2 years after the dinner in the West Loop, after he wrote again requesting a conversation whenever you feel ready. She showed me the draft before sending. I expected fire. It was ice. You keep asking for a meeting as if access is the same thing as repair. It isn't. You made a decision about me before I could speak. I have spent my whole life speaking anyway. If there is ever a conversation, it will not be to make you feel like a father. It will be because I want information only you have. Until then, please stop confusing persistence with care." She hit send, set down her phone, and asked whether I thought the sleeve pitch on a prototype jacket looked arrogant. I told her yes, but in a promising way. That, I think, is the real ending. Not the message itself, not the donor dinner, not the trust documents, not even the first day in my kitchen with grilled cheese and suspicion. The real ending is this. A Tuesday night in October. Chicago cold just beginning to sharpen. My sewing room lit warm against the dark yard. One machine humming, a printer clicking. Wren at the workbench in socks, one foot tucked under the stool, refining a line of modular adaptive fasteners for formal wear because she is determined, apparently, to make the Gala Industrial Complex answer to her personally. Harper in the doorway pretending she is not proud enough to levitate. Nico on the floor muttering over copper wire. My brother Teddy's radio playing low jazz through repaired static. Daniel in every useful object he ever taught me not to throw away. And on the wall above the cutting table, framed now in simple black wood, the hospital bracelet that says Baby Girl M. Porter. Not because she belongs to the name, not because blood outranks life, not because adoption made her less, and recovery made her whole. No, because someone tried to erase her before she had been alive a day, and she grew into the kind of person who makes tools that keep other people from being pushed out of the room. Because my son looked at visible difference and saw the end of his perfect story. And my granddaughter looked at the same difference and built a future out of leverage, steel, thread, and nerve. Because the life he threw away did not just survive. It became precise. It became brilliant. It became impossible to edit out. He wanted a cleaner narrative. What he got instead was the truth standing under bright lights, bare-faced, smarter than him, and entirely uninterested in being claimed by the man who first mistook her for bad optics. I have been asked, by people who prefer healing to accuracy, whether I forgive Graham. No. I understand him better than I did that night in the hospital. Age does that. Time explains the architecture of weakness if you stare at it long enough. I know his vanity was married to fear. I know he worshipped control and panicked when biology laughed at branding. I know remorse visits him now, though not, I think, in the pure form. It is mixed with loss, embarrassment, envy, and the terrible ordinary pain of realizing the person you refused has become remarkable without you. Understanding is not absolution, it is just better lighting. Forgiveness, as far as I can tell, is useful only when it frees the injured party to move more easily. Wren moves just fine without offering him that furniture. So do I. What I did offer her was keys. On her 21st birthday, I gave her the deed transfer papers to this house, effective upon my death but survivorship ready, if I became too inconveniently mortal beforehand. I also gave her the silver thimble, which she accepted with the solemnity of a judge, and then immediately wore on a chain over a black t-shirt like a tiny holy relic for women who own seam rippers. You know this means, I told her, that you are legally obligated to keep at least one very good pair of fabric shears in the building at all times. I was already doing that, she said. I'm just making the haunting conditions clear. She smiled, and for 1 second I saw the newborn in the bassinet, and the 16-year-old in the maker's lab, and the woman she was still becoming all at once, layered like translucent fabric held to the light. Then she hugged me brief, hard, unexpected, and said the only thing that could have mattered. He didn't keep me, she whispered, but you did. That is the whole story. If you strip away the lawyers, the donor dinners, the careful clothes, the years, a baby in a hospital crib, a son who chose image over love, a woman too frightened to stop him when it counted, another woman who took 9 years and a warehouse full of prototypes to get where she should have been on day one, and a girl who turned the very things used to reject her into the sharpest instruments in the room. I still have the christening gown I sewed before she was born, cream silk, tiny hand-finished hem. It hangs in my sewing room closet beside old costumes and garment bags and the past. Wren found it once while looking for buckram and held it up between 2 fingers. What was this for? She asked. You, I said. She looked at it a moment longer, then at me. Too fussy. I laughed until I had to sit down. She was right. It was too fussy, too delicate, too eager to make the world ceremonial when what she needed instead was steel, work tables, blunt truth, and adults who did not flinch. So I kept the gown, and she kept the tools, and between us we made something far more useful than a blessing outfit no one ever wore. We made a life that could not be stage-managed by the people who first mistook appearance for destiny. If this hit you, tell me honestly in the comments. Was Elise right to shut Graham out, or would you have given him one chance? And follow for more stories where the truth doesn't stay buried.